All right. Welcome, Eric, to Keep What You Earn. I'm so excited to have you here to be our legal expert for the day.
Excellent. I'm excited to be here and have a conversation with you, Shannon.
Awesome. So for those listening, tell us a little bit about you and what you do.
Absolutely. I'm a licensed attorney. I focus my area of practice on small businesses and entrepreneurs that are looking to go from a smaller, newer organization and maybe scale up, and those that want to just stay small mom and pop business. You know, those that are providing legal services or goods to a market. Those are the ones that I enjoy helping.
Awesome. And where are you based?
I live in South Florida, where it's sunshine all year round.
Nice. I'm very jealous. Definitely jealous of that sunshine living in Connecticut. So I got a few questions for you because I know that everybody is just at the edge of their seat wanting to understand some of the legal stuff that goes into their business if they're just starting out. And I have to say, a lot of the questions I'm going to be asking you actually come across my DMs pretty frequently because I think there's a common misconception about what accountants do versus lawyers and what our scope of practice is. So I'm really excited that I'm going to have you on to be able to answer the stuff that I can't answer. And I always have to disappoint you guys when I get your DMs when you say, hey, should I have an LLC? And I have an opinion, but I can't share it. So
yeah. Listen, I get the same thing where they expect me to be able to answer the tax questions and tax implications. So it's a nice to be able to trade ideas here.
Yeah. So my first piece of advice for you guys is find a lawyer and an accountant that get along. And then you'll be set for success for sure. So let's kick it off with this. As a brand new business owner, do I need an LLC?
Yeah, age-old question. Do you need one? No, you should have one though. And I'll explain a little bit more. So if you don't set up an LLC or some other business entity, you'd be acting in business as what we call a sole proprietor. And you are therefore liable for all of your actions or inactions that you run through that business. And a limited liability company, as you mentioned, provides limited liability as the name implies, so that if something bad were to happen in the course of offering your goods and services, your personal liability is protected, and an individual, a disgruntled individual, somebody that's filed a claim against you can only seek against your company. Now, they may name you in a suit, but again, the legal proceedings should protect you personally in that route. Ironically, I do have a personal story about this. My wife used to teach baby sign language many, many years ago to infants and toddlers. So very cool concept, but we would have people come into our house. She was operating as a sole proprietor, and a toddler, you know, they're not very well balanced, fell and split their forehead open on our fireplace. And I just had this sinking feeling like, oh my goodness, how bad could this be? Because she was operating as a sole proprietor, providing a service in our house, and somebody was injured. No bad intentions, nothing negligent. It just happened. Thank goodness the parents were good sports. The statute of limitations has now run, and we're in the clear. But it's certainly something. It's just a very small business owner making a little bit of money, trying to do something good, caused a whole lot of anxiety for the both of us, for sure.
Wow. Yeah. And so that begs the question too. I get the question all the time from entrepreneurs, and I work with a lot of fitness professionals too, for example, who have liability insurance. And they think that, oh, I have liability protection, I have liability insurance, so do I really need the LLC too? Don't they do the same thing? And I usually say, no, they don't. I mean, what's the right answer there?
Yeah, I think the more layers of protection you can have, and this is the same concept in estate planning and wealth management, right? The more layers of insulation and protection you can have, the better. So insurance is one layer of protection. The limited liability company is a different one altogether. An interesting thing with limited liability companies and corporations as well, there's this concept of piercing the corporate veil. And I don't want to get too technical, but if certain procedural aspects aren't followed, the court can basically set aside the protections that you're seeking through those entities and come directly at you personally. So you would want to have also your personal umbrella insurance there, homeowners insurance, etc. But you're talking different layers of protection, and the more you have, the better.
Yeah, so unpacking that for a second, the way I describe piercing the corporate veil to my clients is you basically, with an LLC, buy a shield of immunity, but every time you don't follow procedure, you're poking holes in it, literally piercing it to make it easier to slip through or to have someone not respect those boundaries. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Let me, if I can, I'll just explain slightly the differences between a corporation and a limited liability company.
Sure.
Because they do both give you the protection, right? A corporation tends to have more formalities by statute, by state law, that you absolutely have to follow. Limited liability companies have more flexibility in that if you're, generally speaking, deviating from what the state statutes say in your operating agreement, the operating agreement is that document that sets the governing rules of how the entity will run. So long as you're following the rules of your operating agreement, you're okay. So maybe you only have a meeting once a year and you keep your notes. If the statute says something different, most states allow you to deviate in your operating agreement. So more flexibility, harder to pierce the corporate veil with a limited liability company than with a corporation.
Very interesting. Perfect. So you mentioned that the scenario where you couldn't be sued personally, your business would be sued. Does it work the other way too? Does it protect if you're sued, if your business is sued, it protects your personal assets, but does it work the other way? If you're sued personally, is the business immune from the claim?
Yeah, that's an interesting piece of law. Actually, here in Florida, there's a unique law that says if you are what's called a single member limited liability company, and that you're the only owner of that limited liability company, the assets of the company are not protected from your individual liabilities. So if somebody gets a judgment against you personally, and you're the only owner of your limited liability company, they can now seek to go against that limited liability company. So I often advise clients, if you are a single member entity in the state of Florida, find a minority person to come in with you as a 0.5% or 1% owner, or possibly go into a different state to file. So that's a great question. Florida is one of those oddballs. Most states, it does keep the liability separate, but you do have to look for those individual state quirky areas.
That's really interesting. So what I'm hearing is definitely understand your state rules so that you know how you're protected, for sure.
Most definitely.
So on that note, you just mentioned filing in another state. So another question I get asked all the time is, can I file my LLC in a state where I don't live? Because my state, let's say I live in California or New York, and I'm not really a big fan of their tax rules. Can I register my entity in a Delaware, a Nevada, a South Dakota, a Florida that maybe is a little bit more favorable in terms of taxes?
You can file in a different state than where you're living and operating. Whether that gets you out of the state tax laws, I would defer back to you for that. But you can. So let's say, for example, I live here in Florida. If I wanted to create a limited liability company, I could file in Delaware. That's a very popular jurisdiction for people to file in for various reasons. I would have to do a few formalities there, pay some fees, file my documents in Delaware. I'd have to have what's called a registered agent, and we can get into that a little bit later on. And I'd be all set. I would be what's called a domestic limited liability company in the state of Delaware. But I live here and I provide services to clients in Florida. So what do? I have to, by state law, file also in Florida as what's called a foreign entity. I would be a foreign in that I'm domesticated in Delaware. I'd have to file as a foreign limited liability company here in the state of Florida. So they know that I'm doing business in their state. This often creates difficulties for people that are operating in different states, and they have to now file in all these states. And there are some tests that go into play with, hey, do I need to file? Am I actually operating in this state or that state, et cetera? But that would tie back into a tax and IRS analysis. But I don't know if that gets you out of the state tax laws. So, I'm lucky here in Florida, there's no state income tax. So it's a good state to file in as well.
Yeah, for sure. And knowing the answer to that, yeah, you typically are liable for the state taxes wherever you are based, wherever your domicile is. So if you're earning income in, let's say, Connecticut for me, but I want to register my business in Florida, I'm still operating out of Connecticut and still have to do my Connecticut state tax return. So don't get completely off the hook there. But that's why you want to work with an accountant or a lawyer to understand exactly what your responsibilities are, no matter where you are and where you want to operate.
And like you said, hopefully your accountant and lawyer have worked together or communicate often, because that's a good thing. That often there's implications from decisions your lawyer makes and decisions your tax advisor will make that are going to overlap and intersect. And if they can, those two professionals can be aligned, it will make the entrepreneur's life much easier.
Absolutely. You want to make sure that you're on the same page. I have had that happen so many times when lawyers that work with my clients will advise them of something, but knowing what I know about the tax treatment, I would advise differently. So sometimes we don't always agree, but I think that having that all on the table and having a conversation around it and knowing all the facts is what's most important, so that everyone feels like they're most informed to make those right decisions and they're not just relying on one single lens to look at the problem through.
So yeah, so important. You mentioned that informed decision, right? That's the most important thing for our clients and probably yours to do. Make a fully informed decision. As a lawyer, there are certain things that I can't make the decisions for. I need to inform them, let them make the decision, and then implement that for them. And we need to arm them with the facts and the knowledge about the law.
Yeah, totally. So you mentioned just now, you mentioned the registered agent. Can you tell us about who that exactly is and what they do? Because I know that a lot of entrepreneurs, when they start an LLC, one of the first questions they see across the screen when they're filling out their paperwork is, who is your registered agent? And they have no idea what to write. So what advice do you have on registered agents?
Yeah, the registered agent in the simplest form is somebody that will accept legal service of process. And what is that? That's just the process server saying you've been sued. So when you're operating in the jurisdiction, a state, the states require that you have to have an address where if somebody has a complaint or they've been injured, they need to know where to go to give you that legal paperwork. And the registered agent does that for you. You can, if you're operating and you're registered in your home state, you could be your own registered agent if you wanted to. Some people don't like that. If they have a brick and mortar business, a dental office, a medical office, they don't want the risk of somebody coming in and serving a lawsuit while there's clients there in the waiting room. So there are vendors that will provide this service. Lawyers can do it. And you pay a small fee, a couple $100 maybe, to one of these third-party vendors or a lawyer to do it. They receive the service of process, and then they'll notify you by email or some other form if paperwork comes in. This happens a lot with bigger companies and garnishments. You know, companies that have a lot of employees, they get a lot of garnishments that come in, and it's nice to have a third-party vendor to help process that paperwork for you.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you mentioned it's a couple $100. Is that a couple $100 a year or one time?
Yeah, usually it's on an annual basis. You pay your fee, and they'll send you their paperwork as it comes in, or lawsuits. They will also do other services for you. Most of them will do your annual filing. So just like we talked earlier, you have to file in particular states. You have to keep refiling every year. Your renewals have to pay a fee. Those agents can take care of that for you as well, so that doesn't fall off. But ask your attorneys. Oftentimes they may throw it in included with their services for you. Be a registered agent. They'll do your annual filings. That's one thing to look at. I know a lot of entrepreneurs, business startups are looking to minimize their costs as well.
That's really good advice. That's really helpful. So I know we just talked about costs a little bit with the registered agents. Now I want to go into how much does it really cost to get an LLC started? Let's say someone who's listening realizes, okay, I'm a sole proprietor. I don't want to end up in that situation where there's an accident or there's something that happens where I might get sued. I want to protect myself and I want to go get my LLC. What does this mean for them in terms of expectation? So how long does it take? How much does it cost? What should they expect to do in order to get their LLC up and running?
Yeah, so two questions there. Well, let's talk about the money first. There's a couple of fees that you'll need to pay. The state's going to get a fee, and that ranges by state. It's everywhere from maybe $100. Some states are a few $100s, $350 ballpark. It's not exorbitant. You don't need to have, but you should have, again, an operating agreement. You can get those in a variety of places. There are services online. My recommendation is to seek an attorney to help understand your business, your growth objectives, your desires, and create an operating agreement that's unique and specific to your business. There'd be a fee for that as well. And again, that ranges pretty broadly, from a few $100s to a few $1,000s. And again, some of these very large, complex entities that may have 12, 15, 20 members with lots of money putting in millions of dollars, it gets much more expensive because their deals are much more complicated. So the money side can range on the legal piece, but again, for the simple registration, you're looking at $100 to $350. Now, Let me back up to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Yep. So the other part of your question are the documents that you need to do. What do you need to do? You'll need a tax ID number. You're going to need your operating agreement, as I mentioned, and then your articles of organization filed wherever you are, either you're domestic or if you're foreign. Now, the longest wait time is going to be your articles of organization. Some states are very quickly. I filed one just the other day in Florida, and it was approved the next day, and that entity was created. Through COVID, I saw some states that were very delayed, and it was taking a month and a half to get those pushed through and up and running. Some states like Delaware, they allow for expedited filing. So if you want to pay an extra fee, they'll approve you within 6 hours or 12 hours or 24 hours. So there's different levels of expedited fees, again, depending on how much you want to pay. So again, the timing can be anywhere from immediate, same day, to a month and a half. And I've seen those times come down. I think we're over the COVID delays, and they're getting back in track.
Awesome. So it's really a big variety, I guess, depending on what state you're filing in and what you're expecting in terms of support.
It does. And that's where it's helpful to speak with an attorney that, to find out where you want to file along with your tax advisor. Where should I file for the best tax structure? So you're well armed going into the process before you start filing your paperwork and you're set up properly and you know what the timelines are. I've had some people come to me and say, hey, I need this company filed right away. I want it up and running by the end of the day. I got to open a bank account. And then the paperwork is stuck with the Secretary of State in that given state for, a month and a half, and they get very frustrated. So managing client expectations up front is very important.
Yeah. One more question before we dive into hiring a lawyer. One question that just occurred to me. What if you manage a business in a particular state, but you move states? You change where you go. I know a lot of folks these days are they're turning into digital nomads, right? They're moving from state to state. Yeah. They are picking up and leaving, let's say New York or California, moving to Phoenix, to Austin, to Florida, even. What advice do you have when people pick up and leave? They ask me all the time, does my LLC come with me? Is it portable? Or is it something where I have to, dissolve and start fresh?
Yeah, they are portable. I've had clients leave Florida and move to Georgia. They took their entity with them. They remained a domestic company down here in Florida, and they would just register as a foreign company operating in Georgia. You really want to make sure you don't forget to file wherever you are going so that you're legally operating. And again, the detriment there, if you're not properly filed in that state and there is a lawsuit against you, then they may have pierced the corporate veil and they can come after you personally, right? So you do want to make sure that if you have substantial contacts in that state, then you file there either as a foreign or a domestic entity. If you do want to transport your domestic entity and you want to be a domestic entity in your new state, you can do articles of conversion, and the states will allow you to, basically dissolve what you had in state number one and reform the same name, so long as it's not taken and used in your new state. And those are called articles of conversion.
Interesting. So just to remind folks, the LLC is at a state level, right? So, you may own, I may have Fitnancial Solutions in Connecticut, but someone actually may be operating with my name somewhere else in the country.
Absolutely. So now you're starting to get into trademarking, right? And it's important to trademark your name before you pick a name. Most states are going to make you do a search within their state registry to make sure the name's not taken in the state. But you should also, again, another benefit for an attorney, do a trademark search and make sure somebody else in the country is not operating under the same name and that it's not trademarked. Because you could, even if they haven't trademarked their name with the Patent Trademark Office, they could have common law rights to that name. And if they find you operating with the same name, different part of the state, different part of the country, they could have some action against you to shut down. And now you spent a few months building a brand, building a reputation, and you have to pivot and change. So check your name thoroughly across your state and across the country before you file.
That's why I'm so glad that I trademarked Fitnancial.
Yeah,
very happy I did
name.
that.
Absolutely. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. And
so,
that trademarking is another area that is an expense. It can get pretty pricey, but again, it's best to get set up early and avoid problems down the road than to try to fix a problem down the road, because it's much more expensive to try to fix a problem later.
Absolutely. So on the subject of names really quick, I get the question all the time too of my LLC, should it be my name LLC, or is it better to not use my name? And I've heard back and forth, I've heard all sorts of opinions on this, and I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that. Shannon Weinstein LLC versus using a company like Fitnancial, pros and cons, or what you've seen from clients.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't know if I fall any way. I think it really depends personally on what your brand wants to be. Some people want to keep their personal life separate from their business life. I've had a lot of clients that have wanted to remain completely anonymous with their LLCs. And that's one of the reasons they may go to Delaware or another state, because there's some anonymous protections there. So I think it's a personal decision whether you want to build your brand around your name or not. Some professions require you to use your name. Some states, for lawyers, for example, you have to have your name in the entity name, in the Eric Masson LLC. But that varies by state and by profession. So again, to answer your question, I don't fall one side of the fence or either. I think it's a personal decision on how you want to brand and if you want to separate your personal life from your professional life. I think Perfect. It can work either way.
Yeah, I love that. And I believe that too. That's why I went with Fitnancial. I didn't want to be tied down to using my personal name, especially when extensions of me and my team are going to be operating under the company. I didn't want it only to be connected back to me. So I'm glad that, I feel confident with that decision. Now,
that's a great point. Growth, right? So
exactly.
I'm a solo law practitioner. My legal name is Law Offices of Eric Masson. If I start bringing in partners now, I have a name issue, right? So that's a great foresight on your part, and I think that's a great consideration for entrepreneurs to think about as they're starting.
Yeah, because that stationery and that logo can get really expensive if you have to change the the name. One other last question that came to mind was, there's this thing called a DBA too, right? So even if you have a certain entity name, an LLC, I heard you can, you can have different aliases too, right?
You can. It creates a lot of flexibility for companies in that their official name could be Acme LLC, but they could file doing business as, and again, there are state registrations for this. They could do business as Roadrunner Corporation. And they could, so on their sign out in their store, the brick and mortar on their stationery, it would be Roadrunner instead of Acme. So it provides a lot of flexibility. They could start up different business lines, and they could have Roadrunner, they can have Coyote, Coyote Sports, and all these different names, all under the same limited liability company, but they file that doing business as. Interestingly, doing business as registrations often vary by county of where you're at. And they require typically for you to file some sort of notice with the clerk of the court in that county, or to publish in a local newspaper of where you're operating. Some of them are at the state level, but it's again, something to have a lawyer look at to say, if I'm going to register as a doing business as, where do I need to file and how do I do that paperwork so that you don't run astray with it?
That's a great point. So jumping back to hiring a lawyer to do all this for you. So we've gone through, you may want DBAs. You may be adding all this to your mental cart if you're listening, right? I think I need a DBA. I think I need a trademark search. I think I need an LLC. What do I do? Who do I need to help me? Tell me, what are the pros and cons of the different ways that people can do this? Because I know that there are very simple services. If you go on Google, you're going to find LegalZoom, you're going to find InkFile, you're going to find a lot of legal services online that help with stuff like this. And, are there pros and cons to using those service providers versus an attorney?
Absolutely. I think the biggest downfall with one of those services, and I think they can be great for a lot of people, they'll definitely save money and they're on the cheaper end, but they won't necessarily get you the paperwork that you need for your unique business. They run off of templates. They don't get on the phone to learn what are your goals and objectives, what services or goods are you going to be providing, where will you be operating and selling those goods and services. They don't really examine the trademarking issues, the DBA issues that we've talked about that are a little bit more complex. They don't necessarily go into whether you're a sole owner or if you have multiple members. There's lots of different types of, for example, there's manager managed limited liability companies. There's member managed, who has control and the decision making. And lastly, they're not set up to allow companies to scale for growth. If they're going to bring in additional equity or investors down the road, you're really starting from a very basic template and not putting forth the best legal position for yourself and your company for growth. So while those are options, I highly recommend you find an attorney that is well-versed in this area, is comfortable, is focused on serving small businesses and entrepreneurs so that you can get off on the right foot and you don't overlook things like the trademark, and you don't overlook, I should have registered as a foreign entity in this other state where I'm selling products and services. So again, a little bit more money up front, I think will save you a tremendous amount of headaches and money down the road.
Very good advice. Very good advice. And I'm glad that I used an attorney as well when I was getting started. So I echo all of what you're saying too for advice. So if people are interested in hiring you as an attorney to help them with this and help facilitate the whole process, advise them on what they need, how can they get in touch with you and how can they work with you?
Absolutely. I'd be happy to help anybody. And if it's an area that I'm not well versed in, I'll certainly let them know and I'll use my network to get them out to somebody. But they can find me best on my website, ericmassonlaw.com. It's ERICMASSON law.com. If they hit the consultation button and put in the promo code Fitnancials, then I'll give them a discounted rate for being a listener of yours. And I'd be happy to talk with them and get them up and running and in the right direction.
Oh, we appreciate that so much. Thank you for doing the promo code. And for those listening, all that information will be in the show notes. So you'll see Eric's website, you'll see the promo code. Definitely click on that and do a consult with him so he can give you the right advice from the get-go. I can't say that enough. When you're a brand new business owner, you really want to make sure that you've got the right advice in place. So I like to go through a few rapid fire questions with you, Eric, at the end.
Sure,
I love doing this with guests. This is basically to get to know you a bit better outside of your area of expertise. I feel like we've learned so much today, but I want to learn a little bit more about you. And this whole podcast is called Keep What You Earn. So we're going to talk a little bit about money for a second. And my first question is,
all right,
what is one investment that you currently can't live without?
One investment that I can't live without. I like my TD Ameritrade to toy around with some stocks on my own.
Yeah, the literal investments, but is there anything that you've invested in, whether it be in your business or your personal life, that you feel like you can't live without?
I tell you, yeah, great. All right, so more clarity. I cannot live without my practice management software for my firm. I invested in it maybe a month ago, and it has made my case management so much easier, my billing and my time tracking so much easier. I'm going to sneak in a quick number 2, and that's my Adobe Sign account. I get so many documents done through templates and digital signatures. It's amazing. So practice management software, Adobe Sign.
Yeah, and that question is intentionally somewhat vague because I love seeing how people interpret when I say an investment, what that actually means to them too. So it's kind of a dual question. Number 2, what is one thing you learned about money that turned out not to be true?
That the quickest way to amass wealth is by saving. It just hasn't worked out. I think a lot of that is a mindset that I learned is growing up, get the steady job, and save so much of it, and everything will be great. But
yeah, I totally agree with that one. And lastly, what makes you feel like a millionaire?
Besides waking up and seeing the blue sky and the palm trees every day here in South Florida, I think the ability to help people get on the right track and to be able to help them when they come to me with problems, that gives me a whole lot of gratification that is worth all the money in the world.
I love that. And I feel the same exact way. And I think that is the perfect note to wrap on. So for those listening, if you're interested in working with Eric, starting your LLC, doing a trademark search, doing all the things that new entrepreneurs need, hit the link in the show notes, go give him a call and tell him we sent you. Let him know that you heard him on the podcast. And thank you, Eric, so much for your time and expertise. This is fantastic. Definitely check out Eric's website. And bonus, he's an instructor in the Fitnancial Foundations course. So you can get way more of Eric's knowledge in that program, in that course that you learned about in today's episode. So definitely check it out, get educated on the legal side of business, and just avoid those expensive mistakes. We'll catch you next time on the next episode.